Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where the mind and gym come together to help you live your best life. Hosted by two fitness professionals and your personal trainers, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie. And we're live, back again. And this week's episode, we're going to be talking about redlining, thoracic mobility, and calories. And before we get going, Eric, my co-host, and I would like to also include a weekly workout and a food for thought this week. So our weekly workout, we wrote it out as it's a posterior chain workout. It's a heavy pulling day. So barbell RDLs, close grip pull-ups, chest supported rows, half kneeling face pulls. Menchie, go through and give me sets and reps that you'd recommend out there.
Some sets and reps. Sets, I'm a 4-set kind of guy, so like 4 sets. Reps, 8 to 10 reps. If you're looking for hypertrophy, I mean, that's a good place to start. Start there and then work your way down on the reps. As the weeks go on, you can drop the reps.
And go up in weight. And for the pull-ups, if you need to, you can do eccentric pull-ups. That's where you just hold yourself at the very top of the end of the pull-up, and you're pinching your shoulder blades back, and you're coming down as slow as you can. And do those a couple times, probably 5 reps of those, and a couple weeks, and you'll be able to do hopefully a couple pull-ups. But that'll create the strength you need for the pull-ups. But yeah, barbell RDLs. 4 sets of 8, close grip pull-ups, 4 sets of 8, chest supported rows, 4 sets of 8, half kneeling face pulls, 4 sets of 8. Go into any accessory work like core work and end with any energy system development. Always goes a long way. Food for thought this week: do or do not. There is no try. And let's unpack that a little bit for people, Eric, because I think it is a little bit can be confusing to people. Like, oh, so I shouldn't try anything. Like, no, the idea is that you're going into something with full intention to complete it. And that doesn't mean that you're not gonna fail or make mistakes. But if you go into something like, I'm just gonna try it, you're already giving yourself permission to not succeed at it. So go into it with the mindset of completing it and failure, success, and progress. But food for thought is do or do not. There is no try. So on to redlining. Eric, you want to explain what redlining is? What we're talking about when we say redlining?
Redlining. Yes, or in the exercise world, overtraining, which a little bit different, but they are kind of intertwined with each other. So a lot of times when people will hear, oh, I'm redlining consistently, they might think they are overtraining, which is a little bit different than how I view redlining. What I think redlining is driving your system into an overreaching state where you're putting a lot of demand and a lot of stress on the system, on the body to create adaptations and changes. Now, with that stress and adaptation, we are really pushing physiological systems to their close to end range where the body is going to have to change its homeostatic set points to adapt to what you're putting on it. So if you think of a car reference, you have a red line on your speedometer, and if you go up there, you are maxing out the engine, you are putting a lot of force and a lot of stress through the system, which is all good at times. And then there's times where you need to come down from that red line. So when it comes too problematic or too many sessions of training end up in red line, people will get into this overtraining state. And I think it is very misunderstood at times because people need to redline and push the system hard. But once you start to feel the effects of this overtraining, which is, emotional stress, psychological stress, environmental stress, chemical stress. It's going to lead to a decrease in physical performance and mental performance, and you will feel that. That's what we want to avoid with overtraining. Redlining, good for durations, but not always good for the long haul. And I think that's where sometimes I have seen clients and people in this overtraining state consistently and not getting enough recovery on the backside, and they're starting to get this decrease in performance.
And I usually see, and I like, yeah, a decrease in performance is really what we want to avoid. There's costs and benefits to everything. So there's obviously a benefit to getting your system to redline and pushing it to its maximal loads, essentially, or basically like a stress test for your heart and your cardiorespiratory system. But there's also unhealthy ways to redline, and sometimes what I find is some people redline because they might be on blood pressure medication and their blood pressure drops too low, or they didn't eat enough and their body's not able to keep up with the demand of ATP the way that they're moving. I see people get really red and do a lot of chest breathing, and their redlining is ultimately due to the fact that they are not properly using their diaphragm to exhale and inhale. So back to the car analogy, sometimes you redline your motor and you overheat it because you're just putting so much stress on the system in such a short period of time. But also sometimes you're just limiting your exhaust. So like if you stuck a potato in a car exhaust, odds are you're going to get that car to stall out or shut off. Um, so it's the same kind of thing with like kinking your exhales. Everyone's been to the point where you redline and you keel over and you start like just heavy breathing. In reality, that's the point where you're actually limiting your body's ability to exhale properly, which is then ultimately keeping toxins within your system and not making enough room for more fresh oxygen to come into the system. So I do like, and I know you do too, breathing. I think it's so important. I think it's so true that airflow is performance, and you can help successfully get your body to redline um, in a manner which requires only 30 seconds to 90 seconds rest in order to get back into what you're doing. And other times you can redline and you're just dead and you can't do anything for 5 minutes. So I think a lot of it comes down to the way people breathe, the way people warm up their core, and just their breathing mechanics, like setting the tone for the day. But let's rewind a little bit and go back to the overtraining part, because I liked where you're going with that. And so would you say that like redlining too much in the week would cause that overtraining, or would it be the lack of proper recovery protocol, like the lack of a proper diet and the lack of the proper sleep that's not keeping up with your activity levels that's making the redlining a negative at that point?
Both, definitely both play a role. Usually you're going to see it more through training methods. Diet
What
and
do you mean by that? What do you mean by training methods?
so nutrition and sleep, you'll see if that falls off, you'll get decreases in certain levels of hormones and increases of other hormones that'll play into effect. But what we're dealing with when we're really overtraining is more just pushing the body to its almost like the physical limits, and just we're really putting a high load, high dose of stress on the system. And with stress comes release of all sorts of hormones. The biggest ones are glucocorticoids, like cortisol, which have a beneficial effect. But if that stays elevated for too long, then it becomes problematic to the system. The system starts to become desensitized to that elevation, and stuff starts to break down. Metabolic pathways become less efficient. That's where we'll see staleness in training.
Okay. So then if you're successfully redlining through your workout, say that you skeletal muscularly your muscle just failed, right? Like it's the end of like the 10th rep or the 11th rep or maybe it's just the third rep, and you don't have enough gas in the tank to maintain the tension, and just boom, failed. um I wouldn't necessarily consider that redlining. I would consider redlining more of um like pushing yourself to your max over and over again until the point where your body demands more rest. So let talk to me about the importance of when you're aerobically training, um, like heart rates or duration of exercise versus rest in between exercises. And then let's get into the anaerobic side of things too.
Yeah, and where you just said it's not about fatigue during. It's not like, oh, I'm sore. That's just training. Overtraining is just really pushing high intensity workouts too long and too often, and not letting the body literally recover. I mean, there's time periods of 24 to 48 hours that the body needs to adapt, and there's a longer adaptation phase for neurons and brain cells. So if we continue to tax at a high output, the system can't ever regroup and catch up to the first stimulus we gave it. So you're consistently overloading the nervous system, immune system, and hormonal systems together that lead to this state. So in looking at it with exercise, aerobically, it's aerobics it's not going to be as probably as seen. So we know that people can go out and run miles and miles and miles and feel fine if you're doing at a lower intensity. Now, if this is something where you're going out and pushing miles and getting poor nutrition on the front side and bad sleep on the end side of it, and you're doing this consistently every day, over 2, 3, 4 weeks, however long it take, it could be shorter. You're going to get into this overtraining state where you'll see your numbers on your runs and your timing decrease, and that's a sign that you're starting to overtrain. And if you continue down that path, you now become into the state of detraining.
Where you're actually law of diminishing returns. You're actually getting worse with your workouts.
Correct.
Um, okay, so I liked everything we covered there. I guess the last thing I want to kind of touch upon is the anaerobic side of things. So when we write workouts, we typically um, are doubling the rest period to the work. So 30 seconds on, 60 seconds off will keep you anaerobic, correct?
30 seconds on, 30 seconds off.
Oh no, 60 seconds off. So if you're doing like a 30-second run and you want to give yourself a minute before you can get back to that performance base, is if you go 30 on, 30 off, you're going to start to
tap into some aerobic capacity work.
Yeah, and you're going to start to perform worse and ultimately put less of the proper stress on your system to get the training effect that you're looking for.
Well, and I think on that it's not it's the training effect that you're looking for. If you're looking for anaerobic development, the longer the rest, you're going to get more out of the anaerobic. If you're looking shorter rest, the more aerobic the exercise becomes.
Okay, so it's not even fair to say like a 1-to-2 ratio. It just longer rest is going to continue it to be an anaerobic training effect versus an aerobic training effect. And I
Yes.
think that's okay, cool. I think that's really important to mention because I think a lot of people end up trying to stay anaerobic and end up aerobic because they don't want to lose their sweat, or they just want to feel like they're working. In order to feel like they're working, they need their heart rate elevated the whole time.
Which is totally fine. And on that 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, you're going to be pretty anaerobic for the first couple sprints. And then over time, as the system's metabolically, your anaerobic system can't catch up and produce as much energy, it flips over to a more aerobic system percentage of the systems being used. It's still some anaerobic, but you're tapping into that aerobic for repeated energy. And a lot of people think it's the rest that gets involved with this overtraining and just kind of burning yourself out redlining. I always think it has to do more with the high intensity, so the high volume and the high intensity, or the combination of two. So let's take that 30 on, 60 rest. If you're doing 20 of those every other day, I mean, your system's going to burn out pretty quick because you're going high intensity, high volume often.
Right.
And then on
Okay.
your off days, you're doing more high volume weightlifting, and you're never kind of giving it a day to recover and shut down and do anything. And then we're starting to look at elevations of the systems in a negative aspect.
Right. That's the where the overtraining comes into play.
So I think
And
where a lot of people need to be cautious is in this high intensity phase of workout is great, and people are getting on board, people are taking classes and doing all this stuff. I think is awesome. We just have to let them know that this can't be sustained for 5 6 days in a row, that they need to go high intensity, they need to come back off that, you can go high intensity again. But we see it especially a lot in consistent, I see it in CrossFit people who perform CrossFit classes, not necessarily the top end athletes, they're on a different regimen, but these workouts are consistently almost beating you into the ground every single day. Now at times you might need that, but if that's consistent over a month, let's say you're doing that for 20 days out of 30 days, that might lead to an overtraining state or close to. And you see those systems, nervous system, immune, and hormonal systems change. And that's when people can stop seeing results. They're trying to lose weight, they're doing all this high intensity work, but all of a sudden they're seeing weight loss to a point, and then it just stops and they're not seeing anything change. And they might be feeling lethargic, tired, or they might actually start gaining a little bit of weight back because hormone systems are working against them, and
yeah, because
metabolically they're inefficient at what they want to be good at.
they got cortisol running through their veins more often than not, and it
Right.
ends up breaking down muscle and storing fat.
And
I think
what
go
sometimes it's not
ahead.
even fat. It can be it's shown that like sudden increase of subcutaneous water retention. So I think that kind of comes with the high levels of cortisol and the inflammation, but your body's like retaining water as it's going as you're going into an overtraining state. Your nervous system is up. You're basically telling your body, hey, we're going into fight or flight survival mode, and then we're running high sympathetic tone consistently. So your body's now going, hey, this we have to do this to survive. I'm going to flood your system with cortisol to make sure that you have the energy to keep doing this. But at the other side of this, if we keep doing this consistently, back to the car and red line, it's going to burn out. Systems are going to start to fall off, and the body will come at a cost.
Right. Like essentially, the best thing for your body is sprinting and getting to push that ceiling, getting to elevate that heart rate and hitting that maximal heart rate. But at the same time, the worst thing your body would be for sprinting every day, all day, 7 days a week for a year. And I think it's important to mention, like, the devil's in the dosage essentially. So You want
Yes.
to redline probably about anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week, evenly spaced out. And I think a good tool for people to understand um, whether they are redlining too much, potentially overtraining, or ready to redline is heart rate variability. That's a really easy one. Those there's a lot of different wearable technology now that measures heart rate variability and tracks your sleep and checks your recovery by the next morning. I know the Whoop is a really popular one that people like to use because it collects a lot of different data points. People like to use the H7 polar strap, and you calibrate that and you just test what your heart rate variability is, and that will give you more insight into whether your system is prepared for a vigorous workout or whether you need to take it a little bit lighter that day.
And that's where wearable technology can be very, very well. And I think it's going in a good place, and people will get on board with it a little more. But
Yeah,
one of the biggest things is just how your body's feeling. How you're feeling in the morning, how your workouts are feeling, how the lifts are feeling. Are you starting to feel tired? Are you feeling kind of flat? Do the weights feel super heavy? Those are kind of signs that you might be leaning in towards this overtraining effect. Now, on the other side, we are talking about a lot of overtraining. Most people probably are not overtraining. Uh, people are out there pushing a lot of hours a week, and I think it's good to know that you can push that level, you can push that limit, but you kind of know when to really push and when to back off. So that's when recovery comes in. We're not always stressing systems outside of the gym, and we're doing everything we can to get sleep, get proper nutrition, fuel the system.
love it. Furthermore, onto the thoracic mobility side of things, I think the main thing I wanted to discuss here was just the fact that most people that I see are very kyphotic in the upper back, that rounding in the upper back. And their shoulders are rotated in. We like to call it upper cross, and maybe their scapula isn't strong enough to hold their scap back in a proper position, or maybe their chest is just too tight, or maybe it's a combination of both. But I think it's important to I just want to mention that with the thoracic part of the spine, you want that normal S to your spine. You want to be able to have your shoulder blades back. And I like cueing people as keeping your shoulder blades set into your back pockets, kind of back and down. At the same time, there's plenty of different warm up exercises you can do to um, improve your mechanics and your posture. A lot of rear delt work, or no monies, or W's, Y's, and T's, just different things to improve the external rotators of the shoulders. And we sit in front of computers, or we're driving, or we're carrying bags on our shoulder with our shoulder rotated forward, or just the fact that we're forward moving people. We reach for things. In order to walk, you're literally picking up your foot and then you're leaning forward so you fall forward essentially. So we're just more interiorly in the front of the body engaged, and it creates this tightness and this kind of this crunch to our spine. So it's just so important for people to check in with their thoracic extension and their thoracic spine and get that core engaged, get your pelvic flooring and your glutes engaged, keep those scaps back, your chest tall, and your head should be on top of your sternum, essentially.
Yeah, we want to eliminate this forward head posture that we see. And the thorax is a very big part of the body. It's ever moving side to side as we walk, as we run, as we lift, or whatever. And we have to understand that it's asymmetrical in nature. So there's always going to be this bias towards one side versus the other. And when people have this bias and don't they're not most people aren't going to recognize this because it's not what they're thinking about, that the right side's different than the left side. They're just worrying about how to walk upstairs and get onto the train and go to work. But with that, recognizing that the asymmetrical state of the rib cage, we need to now balance that out and get to more neutral state, and then we can move through that state. Because if we're always consistently moving towards our bias, we're going to get locked in that position, and then we get problems like you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I love how the body works with with if you take your center of mass and if one thing goes forward outside that perfect center, then something else goes back. And it's called pendulum theory. And it was developed by Mike Boyle and Gray Cook. But it's just like when essentially if you're looking at the spine from the side and it has that normal S, and now your head is leaned forward and those shoulders start to come forward. Well, now typically that tailbone comes back and the hips tilt in order to offset and keep things in balance. So I think it's so fun because it's like what came first, right? We still kind of debate. And I think a lot of things do come from shoulder mobility and hip mobility. I think they just work, they coexist together. If one's doing something wrong, usually the other one's doing something wrong. So it's important to recognize that when you go to maybe adjust or strengthen your back or your scap or your external rotators, you want to make sure your hips are in good place too. You don't want to just keep your ass hanging out and just being so single-minded and focused on just scap back. And you have your scap back and your chest is tall, but your ribs are flared out, and you have this lower back like arch, lordosis. So I think it's really important to just treat the whole system as one kinetic chain like it is. And if you're fixing something or just improving something, then you got to keep that in mind.
Right. Especially because the thoracic part, I mean, we're talking the rib cage, the stuff inside and underneath the rib cage is all moving as we move. And the ribs are moving individual of the spine itself. So it's more to take in consideration of just turning left and turning right and stabilizing. We need to make sure we're moving that rib cage with a spine in the correct position. And as you mentioned earlier in the red line, breathing correctly, because breathing incorrectly can throw the whole thorax stability and mobility dynamic out the window.
Oh man, I love that you brought that up. That's so great. Yeah, most people breathe up in their chest and they're creating that tightness. They're adding to that poor posture, and you have to breathe down into your diaphragm, into your belly there, and you're actually going to free up the the muscles and just everything involved in breathing up in your chest and allow you to get that extension that you need.
And with that point, breathing into or breathing with upper neck muscles or muscles pulling up on the rib cage, think that of what that does to scapular position and scapular movement. If those muscles up top are always tense and tight, how is that going to affect the rest of the rib cage? And then if it's consistent, if you're doing this every day as you breathe and have been doing it non-noticeably for a while, what position is that going to pull your rib cage in or your spine in, lower spine, hips? It's all connected, and it all really stems from how the diaphragm is set underneath our rib cage on our spine as well, and how it can pull that into positions.
And I'm going to throw a little homework out there for anyone who has a really rounded back and wants to improve their thoracic posture, their thoracic extension, is what Menchie's talking about, those muscles that are super tight. um, getting into, maybe you're in like an incline push up, so you put your hands on a bench and your feet are on the ground, and you go into like a yoga move, like the cowl, where you're trying to push your spine up towards the ceiling through your shoulder blades, and then you come back bringing your chest through your shoulders and you set those shoulder blades. So it's an idea of like contract, relax. You're trying to over contract everything and then get everything set down to help. Ideally you're not overactive in your traps, you're not super tight in your neck. Whether it's your levator scapula, your scalenes, or your upper trap, those are going to prevent your subscap, teres minor, teres major, and serratus from properly engaging, maintaining that position for the scap. So I think scap push-ups is what they're called. It's just putting your hands on a bench, feet on the ground, and just pushing the bench away as far as you can get yourself, and then coming back, bringing your chest between your shoulders and setting those shoulder blades. And it'll feel like your lats. It'll feel like your lats are engaging.
Yeah. And on the other side, the front side of the body, where we see this upper cross syndrome a lot, and people kind of forget, is the good old pecs. Everyone loves to bench. I love to bench, but we also need to respect how the pecs help us breathe and push our rib cage when we inhale and exhale, and how mechanically those operate. And if we're always shortening the pecs and we're creating this short stature, we're pulling shoulders towards each other, we're pulling the sternum towards midline and together, how is that going to affect the back aspect of the thoracic spine? That's when we start to see some of this kyphotic in nature. As we're compressing the front of the rib cage, the back air's got to go somewhere, so we push air in the back and we start to get this rounded position, which throws off the scaps. So what you're saying on those is great, is we're coming through. We also have to respect and open up anteriorly as we're pulling shoulder blades down and towards each other and getting low traps and serratus on. We're also inhibiting those pecs from trying to hold everything together and tight in the front and releasing anterior necks. And that's what I've been seeing a lot lately, especially with people who sit at desks, is these anterior necks are just so locked up that you can do all this other stuff, try to get low traps and triceps and serratus, but if they can't unlock their anterior neck and chest, it's a lot harder for them to feel what you want them to.
Yeah. And a simple thing is just those door frame stretches. Just put your arm at a 90 degrees and lean through the door frame with your arm on the side of the frame. And then put your hand down and really keep your hand behind you, stretching that chest. That'll get your front delt, your pec minor, your pec major, and help kind of free up the guys that are pulling you forward.
Another one that I love is supine on a bench, where you can let your arms hang out to the side, and as you exhale, you're pulling the lower ribs down, so you're helping set the diaphragm in the breathing. And as you're reaching out to the side, you're just exhaling and letting your abs pull the rib cage down towards your hips, which takes tension off the neck muscles that are also attached to the sternum and upper ribs. That is another good one to alleviate that tone, tension, and tightness.
All right. Look at that. Redlining, thoracic. We got left is calories. And I think it's a really important topic to bring up, because I think so many times that's the first place we start, is calories in versus calories out. Whether you're trying to add weight or lose weight, it's usually not the only focus, we'll say. I think there is definitely a time where you and I coming into this field where people would even say a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, and quickly that was diminished to heck no, that's not true, because 1,000 calories of chicken is going to be a lot different in my system than 1,000 calories of butter. Um, an important thing to remember, though, is the way that the body adapts. So whether you're trying to gain weight or lose weight, you can't just pick a caloric intake, adjust your macros and or macronutrientation between protein, carbs, and fats, and then set it and forget it. It doesn't work like that. If you're eating at a surplus, you're trying to gain weight. Well, eventually your basal metabolic rate, the rate that you're burning calories, goes up. So you're going to have to eat more to keep up with your weight gain and adding lean muscle mass on your system. Consequently, we've known since a study in the 1950s that eating less to lose weight doesn't work. It has like a 90% failure rate because it might work in the short term, but eventually your body adapts and it says, "Oh, you're only giving me 1,100 calories a day? Well, we're only going to burn 900." It's just a survival mechanism in the body. So there's not that much fear nowadays for needing to survive long winters and preserve and go into starvation mode. So you got to be smart about it, and you got to, make your body work for you depending on what your goals are. So if you're trying to lose weight, guess what? You have to eat. I think that's a really hard pill for people to swallow, pun intended, because people are like sitting there, they feel overweight, they feel guilty by putting food in their mouth because they're not at their target weight. But that's not how it works. You have to make a well operated system, and then you have to set yourself up in a situation where you're losing weight over a week or 2 weeks at a time of pounds of fat, not just weight on the scale. And I think that's another reason why people misstep and just count calories in versus calories out, because they don't have enough tools in their tool belt to really tackle the problem. Because if you're at your scale at home, there's so many reasons why the number could go up or stay the same. You could be adding muscle, losing fat, your water weight could be higher, like we talked about earlier with inflammation markers, or just retaining more water. So I think calories is a important benchmark, but it's very limited. And I think it's important to remind people, like, you're trying to create this big image and understand the way that your body is partitioning fuel and the way your body is recovering. And a lot goes into that. Are you sore still? Are you still hungry at night? Are you craving certain things? Do you find you're having trouble with willpower and snacking? Because there's a reason why your body's probably craving salty things at night. There's a reason why your body's craving like a chocolate. It might not be getting metals that it needs, right? Or you're craving something sweet, like your body does need some starches or some sugars, essentially. So it's important to just remember the shortcomings of only counting calories, and then variability. Mix it up. Have some high calorie days, have some low calorie days. There's so much to talk about on this topic, and unfortunately, we only have like 5 minutes left, and I don't want to just ramble on. I want to get you a chance to talk, but I think it's just the starting point. We talked about, the launch of this season. We talked about elimination diets. We talked about the food pyramid, and now I wanted to get into calories. So I want to touch upon it. I think it has an important role, but I think it doesn't stop there, and I think a lot of people just end up stopping there.
Right. And I think what you said at the beginning, as you cut calories or restrict calories, it is a survival mechanism. Our bodies are built on efficiency. If the body doesn't have a source of fuel, it's not going to exceed what it doesn't have, vice versa. I mean, it's pretty basic understanding that if you need a lot of muscle mass to do something, your body will put it on. But if you're not using that muscle mass, it will get rid of it because there's no need for the body to use that. So it is the same thing when it comes to calories in versus calories out. And people have to be cautious of what is the body actually using in regards to everyday life, exercise, and what their fitness routine is and what they're taking in. Because it can be very simple. And a lot of diets today work because they are more on the negative caloric side of average calories. So you take your, let's take an average diet of keto diet or intermittent fasting and stuff like that, which are all good diets, but the reason they work and people see weight loss on them is because there's a slight reduction of calories right off the bat in a change of what people are eating, that people see these results. But as you stated earlier, in the long term, it becomes tough because now we have to add this into daily life and we have to regulate how this is going to work. And it can be like rhythmic. It can be days of higher, days of lower. The body will adapt. It's not one way of, hey, we always should be high, we should always be low. That becomes problematic in itself. Because if it's too high, we're upregulating too many pathways and we're always staying on. And we're creating more growth of possible bad cells in our body. We're not getting into body cell clearance and cell death. And that's not a good thing, especially with the foods we're eating today, which are are not beneficial towards our health. We're talking processed foods, we're talking sugars, stuff that comes in wrappers and bags. That stuff is not the same as a piece of chicken, a steak, a sweet potato, a vegetable. The calories are just a unit in science. It basically tells me what I need to do to heat water up. So,
Yep.
but I think now it becomes more of this. People see a calorie as almost a bank account. Oh, this is the number. This is what I have. Let me use this number. If I go above this number, okay, might not be good. I might gain weight. If I go below this number, oh, I'm good. I lose weight. Or people leverage the calorie as, oh, it's 100 calories. That's not too bad. So 100 calories of like these thin potato chips, baked, all natural. Woo, might not be. Probably baked with canola oil. Or 100 calories of blueberries looks completely different. And people need to be aware that these are not the same. Like 100 calories of one thing does not equal 100 calories of the other. And that's where I kind of get into a fight with calories a bit. I don't know how you think, but on that kind of analogy, but a lot of times people are like, oh, it's just 100 calories. It has nothing to do with the calories. It's what.
Yeah, I really try to shy away from calories. I try to actually shy away from hyper focusing on all this stuff in general. I think there needs to be a level to which you analyze, and your physical therapist said it that we interviewed. On the first season, there's a time to analyze and there's a time to execute. And when people go through their life and they analyze every single choice and every single dietary thing that they put in their system, and they hyper focus, and there's actually now a disorder for it. They've clinically put a disorder to it when you hyper focus on all this stuff, and it annoys me because it just is what it is, and it's just like we either go too far left or too far right, and don't realize that like we gotta just always be checks and balances and find the equilibrium, find the balance, which changes on a day to day, week to week, month to month, hourly, minute by minute, second basis. And on that note, we are going to have to wrap up, and it is time for closing statements. So, redlining, thoracic mobility, calories, go. You got to marry one, kill one. No, I'm kidding.
Redline. Go to redline. Push your system. Stress your system. You need that for adaptation. Know when to back off. If it's a high intensity day, maybe the next day is a little bit lower on the intensity, then you can ramp it back up. It's got to be cyclical, rhythmic. It can undulate back and forth, high and low. Very self-explanatory. Know when your body's fatigued. Ooh, thoracic movement. Breathe right. Reset the diaphragm. Reset the rib cage. Once you get that in place, hips, scaps, necks, arms will move how you want them to. And reach either Matt and I for more information on this on thoracic mobility. We can guide you into the right direction, right movements on how to increase maximal thoracic ability and airflow. And then calories, be diligent. be smart with what you're eating. Always choose whole, natural foods first. Processed foods, always question. Look at ingredients list. Calories are nothing. They do not mean anything to you from now on.
I love it. So mine is redlining. If you're run down, exhausted, sore all the time, you might be redlining too much. Try to take a day or two where you do a little bit lighter work. If you feel good and you're not getting your results that you want, try redlining your system once or twice a week. Thoracic mobility, a good little test is the T-spine rotation. Check to see if you can get that rotation, and then you're going to worry about trying to strengthen your scapula in all types of pulling. And generally speaking, you want to do twice as much pulling as you are pushing. And then calories, proceed with caution. But remember this: where are you primarily getting your calories from? And that can be a good indicator of where you need to take your next steps for your diet. And that is all for this week of Think Fitness Life, and we'll catch you next time. Live long and prosper. Peace. Thanks for listening. We hope you gained something from this episode. Our mission is to help people live their best life, both physically and mentally. Check out thinkfitnesslife.com for additional resources and schedule a complimentary assessment with one of us. We're always here to help.